So let me introduce you to Lynn, Cameron, and Helen Robert. They co-founded TechEdge in 2000. TechEdge was created to provide specialized compensation advice, guidance, and market information to startups and other SME organizations. TechEdge has helped more than 100 companies get a grasp of their biggest investment and manage it more effectively. Lynn and Helen are actively involved with technology associations throughout Ontario and have been asked to share their expertise with OCREs, that's the Ottawa Mars, CFO groups and commercialization companies, as well as a number of HR-related groups and associations. TechEdge has been nominated for OCRE's Supplier of the Year Award and 2 Vision Awards for their active support to advance the profession of HR through the Ottawa Region Rewards Association. Both hold business degrees and are certified compensation professionals. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Joe. Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for having us today. One of the things that I wanted to start off with was, first of all, my name is Lynn. I'm the Lynn part of the team. This is Helen. Was to find out a little bit about what you know about compensation. For example, how many of you have worked with compensation structures in the past? Just show of hands. Okay, so not too many. Okay, that's good to know. What we hope to do today is we hope to essentially give you a place to start. We also have some handouts that will be available. Just provide us with your business card and we will email them to you. In the handouts you'll find a selection of different tips, tools, checklists, templates, that sort of thing, and a full library of our generic job descriptions that we use in our survey where we collect the information from the marketplace. One thing about TechEdge that you may not know is that we focus on the Ontario Technology Corridor, in other words, the 401, and I just wanted to give you a frame of reference about where our world is and where we focus. So just to continue on, this is actually the overview of the 3 different courses. We've entitled our presentation, Compensation and Your Battle for Talent. The word battle sounds a little bit aggressive, but in technology, things are so ever-changing that it really has become one of those places where you feel like at times everybody's going for the same skills. So this is something that we really, really have to look at from a compensation perspective to ensure that we have the structures in place to protect you and to really give you a strategic edge. These are some assumptions that we have, we've decided to bring up front so that we can all kind of say we're starting from the same playing field. Those would be that in the technology world, as I mentioned, things are ever changing. And one of the most important elements of a technology company, as opposed to many other types of industries, is that people are really the biggest asset. We find that more and more technology companies are contracting out any of the real capital-focused efforts, and more knowledge is really what it's all about. We're also looking at the fact that top talent is an area that companies have to develop specific strategies for in order to really keep these people. That top 10 percentile in the marketplace, those people that, regardless of whether it's a downturn economy or a thriving economy, there are still many opportunities for what we term top talent. So we have to be very careful that that's examined from a compensation perspective too. We're also looking at the whole idea of the cost of people. And a lot of the time in the HR world, it's very difficult to cost out a lot of the different decisions that you make and whether or not they've had the right impact on the bottom line. This comes up, I'm sure many of you will struggle with the so-called soft costs that you find with human resources. But what we're finding is that more and more there are really some really good quantitative ways to pull together that value, and that it's important to really look at all of the different people costs, whether they be the hiring process, whether they be during the career development phase of the employee, through the life of the employee with your organization. And for example, what does something like the wrong hire or a bad hire really cost you? So these are some of the things that are very important to look at and to try to drill down on. And the fact that especially in technology, it's a very team-focused sort of environment. You know, you're dealing with constantly changing projects, constantly changing resources and teams, and it's really important to make sure that you understand the you know, kind of the psychological impact that that has on a team, especially if a leader leaves or if a really key player leaves. If anyone leaves, especially in some of the smaller organizations, which I understand most of you represent here, now that's a big hit. It's an awfully big hit to you, so you want to make sure that the compensation is on target.
Can I just ask a question? How many of you have staff right now? Already have employees? Okay. And do you have a sense of how much your labor costs are as a percentage of your operating budget? Yeah, okay. Is it more than 80%? Okay. Yeah, I was actually shocked. I knew it was high, but yesterday I was at a conference and somebody asked a room full of about 200 compensation professionals, put your hand up if your operating or if your labor costs are higher than 80% of your operating budget, and everybody but one person put their hand up.
Which is not surprising.
No.
To any IT or any tech.
Exactly, and I think more and more in Canada, and probably especially in Ontario, we are a knowledge-based economy. Right? We're losing manufacturing offshore and all of that sort of thing. We are a knowledge-based economy, so our people are our greatest asset. And so one of the things we want to talk about today is making sure that we're managing that huge investment as well as you can. Right. Yes, so we want to try to hold on to that.
Is everybody understanding that? Yeah, it's we had heard for the last several years the number 70%, you know, that it's your people costs, i.e. salaries and anything dependent on the salaries. All of those sorts of different investments are considered now, it sounds like 80-90%. So obviously the number is growing, and therefore even more important to really get a handle on it, and especially in the startup organization, to get a handle on it earlier, so that when we go through the presentations, some of those pitfalls don't happen to any of you. So the question is pay important? You know, it's that simple, and I think it's kind of rhetorical in a sense. I think most of you would agree that yes, you know, you have to pay for the rent or the mortgage and so on. So, you know, the answer would be yes. But the interesting part is that it's important, but it's even more important when you get it wrong. As human nature is, what tends to happen is compensation is one of those things that if it's good and competitive and, you know, people are thinking that their value has been met with the compensation package that they've been offered or given, it becomes almost a little in the background. You know, it's really not something that takes up their headspace. It's not something that might detract from their productivity or cause them to be absent because they're looking elsewhere, or they're just, you've heard of the term workplace absenteeism, where people are at their desk, but they're really not there. So, you know, lots of things like that tend to occur, and those are definitely hard to measure. Very, very difficult to measure. So if you were challenged today, and when I say challenged, the challenge can come from many different angles. The challenge can come from your employees if you have them. The challenge can come from, say, an advisory group that you're working with, you know, people that are funding you. It could come from a board of directors. But more importantly, what we're asking you to do is to ask yourself these questions. Challenge yourself and ask yourself, you know, are you okay with the compensation that you're planning, and are you satisfied that you've done your due diligence, that you've actually, you know, done your homework so that you can feel confident that the salaries that you're offering make sense. So again, to ask yourself, drill down a little bit more, we're asking questions like the whole idea of looking internally between employees, looking externally at the relevant market for the skills that you're looking for, and also that they're not discriminatory. You know, there's a lot of very good legislation out there to help to protect, whether it be race, sex, whatever it is, but that there's an element of that in your philosophy. And that you're managing your compensation investment well. And this is really key. What we found over the years is that a lot of our clients start off by thinking that compensation is an expense. You know, we know what the financial statements look like and we see the big numbers. But really how to help strategically look at compensation, how to really, really examine where the money's going and why, and does it make sense, and doing that kind of cyclical process. Compensation is an investment. Those people that you're hiring, you continue to invest in, whether it's with your own time, whether it's with courses, on-the-job training. They are an investment in the future and success of your company. So it's kind of a way of thinking, but it's really important to look at compensation in that way. One of the things that we found with compensation is that I mentioned earlier about it kind of goes away if everything's fine. You know, you end up seeing sometimes what can happen is two people doing the exact same job but with different salaries. And unfortunately, at times you hear, well, hopefully they won't talk, you know, and of course, one thing leads to another and people find out. So these are the sort of dilemmas that not just small business, but many businesses find themselves in, is this dilemma of, okay, now what do I do? So the goal for today, in terms of being able to really feel like you've done your due diligence and you have a plan, is that we want you to be able to answer yes. So as I mentioned earlier, we will also be providing you with some handouts that will help you after this lecture and, you know, kind of give you a place to go through and ask yourself these questions. It's all documented for you. So everything from you know, looking at job descriptions and how that would help you with your compensation, as well as things like how to establish compensation structures. And when you have those and you've figured out, you know, what your company philosophy is and how your compensation structures will work, how do you position individuals within it? You know, so there's a whole kind of range of stages that you look at when you're looking at your compensation. Now, we recognize that it's not just about the money. We recognize that there are a whole bunch of other things. There's benefits, there's perks, there's work-life balance. Yes, he looks a little bewildered and it can get complicated. The good news is that, you know, this is definitely something that you should be looking at, and that there is information out there on all of these different types of programs. But today what we'd really like to do is focus on salary. And the reason is that salary is really the foundation of all of these programs. Salary is really the base level where employees will definitely go to bat and they'll fight for these, absolutely, and they can make the difference. If you'd like to hire somebody, they can definitely make the difference in terms of being competitive. But salary is the foundation because a lot of these programs are dependent on that salary. For example, life insurance is usually a multiplier of salary, and your disability is based on your salary, and a lot of the benefits are based on salary. So this is very important that salary is the first thing that we examine as we go through this compensation process. So again, salary is the foundation. What we typically find when we look at employees is that they have this, again, perception is everything. It's a perceived sense of value. Are they getting what they think they are worth? Now, obviously, sometimes perception also has to be managed, and the more structure and due diligence you have in place, the easier it is to have those conversations because they're based on something logical and something tangible. They're not just based on a subjective opinion. So the employee starts to believe in the process, and that's where they gain some trust, and they also have an opportunity to discuss it. So it's not just a one-way street. So their perceived sense of value is extremely important in the psychology of how you set up your compensation. And again, that fairness and trust, like it's all one kind of package of emotion. You know, the individual starts to really believe that you're out there really looking out for them and that it's a win-win. It's not just a matter of the employer getting the best price they could get. You know, this was this person actually came in 10K lower than the other person. That's not what it's about. It's about the person feeling they are getting their sense of value out of the package. And it also, as I mentioned earlier, it really drives their productivity and their commitment. It really makes them believe in the cause of the company and that they are part of the team. Now, we also have the sales force, which Joe mentioned we'll be getting into more next week, which is a whole other area, which I have to say Helen and I have a real passion for. We love the whole sales area. It's very complex, it's very intriguing, but I love the psychology. And I think that's the part that really triggers for me is there's some really interesting stuff going on in the sales force, and there's some really different types of sales individuals. So we're not going to focus on that today, but just so you know that when we look at salary, we look at that very differently, okay? And as I mentioned in the last slide, salary, again, drives the value of a lot of the other programs that I was pointing out to you, whether they be life insurance or what have you. Okay, so some of the potential exposures. Clearly, underpaying is going to be painful. Now, this is something where you may get the employee, you may find that they're green, but at the end of the day, are you going to increase your turnover costs, which can be extreme. Don't underestimate what turnover is costing you. It's a very, very, very expensive thing, and I've gone through this with clients, and it's a very eye-opening experience to see exactly what it could have cost you and what it did cost you in the tens of thousands and up. It's a very expensive exposure. And then it's also, again, it's back to that kind of just unhappy staff that aren't really committed, they're not really motivated, they're not giving you their 150%. And in startups, you need that. You need everybody doing everything they can. The question of overpaying, a lot of the time we get this bewildered look like, yeah, overpaying. But like for those of you that have staff, do you believe you're overpaying any of your staff? I don't know. How do you know, right? And that's really the point is, how do you know? Because they're not going to leave. They're the ones smiling and kind of hiding and going, yes. And you're just thinking they love you, right? Well, they might. They might think that you're the cat's meow and you might be a wonderful leader. But it begs the question, how do you know you're not? And again, like I have a comment on the slide that this restricts headcount, and think, oh, that sounds dramatic, but it's incredible how easy this can get out of control. And again, I've worked with clients that have gone through this situation where they kind of call the network, oh, do you know any software guys? I need a developer, and oh, great. Oh, yeah, okay, he works with this guy, great, okay, I'm gonna give him a call. Perfect, we set it up, he's hired. Well, we all know that that's not the right way to do it, but it happens. You're in a rush, you need a warm body. So you bring in the software developer, not knowing that you've actually paid what he asked, which is 10K more than what you really had to. And this is just an example, it's just throwing money out there. And then you need another software developer. And before you know it, you've hired 5 developers and you're basing them all on wrong information. So again, let's use some simple math. $50,000. Albeit annualized, you could have hired yourself another new grad, right? So it really does, and then it becomes the legacy of, okay, now you go and you do your homework and you find out, oh, geez, no wonder they're so happy. Thought they just loved me. What happens is you really are in a position where now, try taking that away. Not fun. And we would never recommend that you do. What you do is you do your due diligence. Obviously, that should have happened before. You get your facts straight, and then you sit down and you have a talk with these people, and you tell them about the plan. But basically, the plan can be many different things, and I'm not going to go into that level of detail with you now. But just to show you that this is an issue that a lot of people, it's that invisible sort of problem that they don't even know they have because everybody's just so happy. Again, with startup organizations, I talked about, let's just call someone from the network. We call that the kind of intuitive ad hoc approach. It might work for a while, absolutely, because the network is a powerful thing. You know some good people and they know some good people. And that definitely can work. There's no doubt about it. But usually when you get to anywhere between 3 to 5 staff, you start to think, okay, so they're starting to talk and you're starting to notice that maybe something's not right, but it's early days. What we're basically looking at, though, if you look at it more exponentially and you go beyond that and you're really successful, well, growth is a great thing, but what growth is going to create for you without that due diligence and without that structure, it's going to create, with the more decision makers, it's going to create that kind of chaotic, who made the decision. And I actually worked for a company, it's called Alcatel now, but it was called Newbridge when I started. It was a company with absolutely no policies, no procedures, no structure whatsoever within the HR world. We were essentially 700 people just in Canada, and we had absolutely nothing to say how you make people decisions. We had a team of 5 people in HR, and we spent most of our time yelling down the hall, "What did you say last week about vacation?" Okay, that was the reality of the situation when I started. We had complete chaos, 700 people, and we were trying to manage it. What do you think happened? Managers started taking it into their own hands. And you can see why. They started to say, okay, well, I guess we're just going to start giving 3 weeks vacation. I needed to do it, and so I'm going to give everybody that now. Okay, interesting. Okay, is that competitive? I think so. So as you can see, that's a really extreme example, but we had to very quickly grow the HR department and catch up. We had to put systems and processes and structure and market research. We had to get our acts together so that we could then try to do some damage control. And that's where you end up is if you're small, it's manageable, but the bigger you get, the bigger the mess can become. Here are some signs. Some of them seem very obvious, and they are. Some of them not so much. Some of them are harder to diagnose. Obviously, good people leaving. That's a killer for a small organization. That's a real killer. And the danger too is if they're an influential person in the company, other people may go. So that's something to be very, very cognizant of. Absenteeism, for whatever reason, whether it's sitting at their desk or they're looking for another job. New people just not working out, and you go through this entire hiring process in 2 months. It's just the fit's not right. Why are these things happening? Not being able to get that offer. You keep getting to a point, and you've got this good person and this good person, and they just will not sign, and you don't know why. What is wrong? Things like, again, technology is very project-based, so you're looking at missed deadlines. Missed milestones for a small company are huge. They're huge. That sets everything back, and you might just be getting product to market. Lots of knowledge gaps again. Not quite sure, okay, well, who can do this? Oh, I guess I'll have to do that. And the fact that, again, back to the chaos. Employees are constantly at your door, constantly asking questions because they have nothing to go to. They have no kind of resource, or they have no reference or structure, nothing to kind of say, okay, all I have to do is go to my intranet site and I've got all this information. I don't need to bug my manager. So here are some questions to ask yourself. Again, are you paying too much? Not enough? It's the whole idea of being competitive. Very, very important. Are your recruiting and training costs too high? Again, extremely important and very, very potentially expensive. Are people leaving, complaining? Both. Are you finding that there's a lack of trust? There's a lot of reasons for that. There's communication is very important, and people think if you don't talk, you have something to hide. Can you defend what you're doing? If, for example, you're going to sit down with your staff and you're going to go, well, you know what, I heard cost of living's, what, let's say 3%. Okay, so let's go with 3%. We're just going to give everybody 3%. What's that? Yeah, I know. Yeah, okay. I don't want to go any lower than that. But in essence, is that okay? How do you defend that? Is it one of these? How do you defend that to yourself? And really, again, a lot of you don't have boards. A lot of you may not have other executives or advisors, but you need to know yourself. And the idea of using bonuses, this is another fun one too. In the technology industry, it varies. It's interesting. Again, there's a lot of behaviors behind it and a lot of psychology behind it, but when is it the right thing to use? And if you choose not to, what does your compensation package look like in terms of measuring it with competition? So there's a whole bunch of things to consider in there as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the presentation over to Helen, and Helen is going to go through from the developing philosophy stage, so obviously the vision, through to really helping you see the steps to attaining that competitive compensation view.
Do I just press buttons to move forward? Okay. I'm not very technical. So I get to do kind of the more boring, the more sort of step-by-step stuff. Hopefully Lynn has been able to sort of explain to you why you need to think about compensation from a more strategic perspective. You want to look at your people as a long-term investment and leverage everything you can out of them for the money it's going to cost you. So the first step in doing that is really to develop a philosophy, and you can do that whether you have no staff yet or whether you have 150 or 700 staff. You can take a step back and think about what is our intent. Let's articulate our intent. So the kinds of things you want to do is think about the overall compensation package. So in an essence point of view, who is it that you compete with for skills? And be careful on that one, because people are very quick to tell me, well, our competitors are this and this and this, and we sell accounting software, so QuickBooks and Simply Accounting are our competitors. So my question back to them is, okay, but where do you get your developers from? And they say, oh, this company, that company, this company. Okay, so it's a different kind of competition that you're thinking about. So your competitors for skills are not necessarily the same people you're competitors with for product. So try to keep that in mind. So look at where you're recruiting. Do you have to recruit? Can you recruit locally? Do you have to go provincially? Do you have to go nationally? Internationally in some cases. I once had a group of people, and I can't honestly remember what it was back in the mid-90s, but we had to go and advertise in a local weekly newspaper in some tiny village in Ireland because Nortel had a shop there. And they had a group of 10 of these people, and they were that scarce that this is how we had to advertise for really scarce technology workers. So you have to really target your thinking, and I'm sure Margot went through some of that with you last week. You have to think about where you want to sit in that market. Do you want to be perceived and known out there in the marketplace to be paying top of the line, absolute best salaries, best bonuses, best benefits out there? Maybe you'd love that, but can you afford it? You got to think about that. Matching the market, that's really what we're talking about when we're saying competitive. If you decide to lag the market, which means I'm going to pay less than the average company out there, you might be able to do that. We have a client right now who has recently joined us on our survey because they feel that it's time to put this stake in the ground. And when we've gone through everything with them, they are paying definitely quite low as compared to others. But they have the coolest work environment, they have the tightest knit group of people, and the really neat technology they're working on, and they have had no turnover yet in the 3 years they've been in business. So they're able to do it successfully because they have that reputation. People want to work there for many reasons, so they can get away with it. But you have to really think about that whole package and what you're offering. And often when you're in a startup situation, you may be trying to get skills away from organizations that have much more of an established presence in the market. And so, what often happens is that you definitely need to be competitive with your pay, or someone won't leave a job that they perceive to be maybe more stable. Now, right now, that might not be so much of an issue, but things are bouncing back, and people will be a little bit more hesitant to leave something that they believe is more stable to join something that they may perceive to be more risky. So it's important to think about where do you want to position yourself. Think about internal and external equity. The reality of the tech market is that external equity or market competitiveness really is king. It really, and has been for many, many years now. Internal equity is important when you're looking at similar skills, but you will find that you will need to pay your finance people differently than your engineers, differently again than your marketing people. So you need to keep an open mind, and you need to think about making sure you can, whatever you create will be flexible enough for you to manage all of those differences based on the market supply and demand for the different kinds of skills you'll need, okay? And then the mix. When we're talking about the compensation mix, how much should be base salary, how much should be bonus, how much should be really cool technology, how much should be free pizza on Fridays, how much, think about all the different things that you want to offer, and overall, where do you want to position yourself? Once you've figured that out, articulate it. And make sure your staff know what your intent is, where you're trying to position yourself. Right there, that's saying, I want to do this as an organization, or we want to do this as an organization. We want to position ourselves here, and how are we going to do it? So always communicate. One of the problems with compensation is historically it used to be a little black box. And people would write up a job description, going back to a big company, and they'd submit it to HR. And somebody would come back and say, you're a level 17, and this is your salary range. And you go, okay, thank you. That doesn't work anymore. We've got educated workforce. We have people who have easy access to lots of internet information. They've got lots of friends, people talk. They know what they're worth, or they think they know what they're worth. So you need to be as prepared as they are, all right? Do I press here? There we go. So your philosophy, as Lynn said earlier, make sure there's something in there to say that your intent is not to be discriminatory. Think about your financial condition. So what can you afford to say? What can you afford to commit to? Because this is a long-term thing. This is your motherhood and apple pie. It's equivalent to your vision statement, okay? You don't want to be promising things you can't deliver. Think about supply and demand for the kinds of skills you know you're going to need in your business, okay? And then make sure that you're factoring something to consider individual performance within that. Because technology is a performance-driven environment. So if you're thinking about, you're coming from an organization that had a little step progression and every year you got a raise till you hit the maximum of your range and then you sat there forever, that will not fly in the technology world. It won't fly in most knowledge-based environments. People expect to be rewarded for their performance. So once you've sort of thought about that at a high level, think about the more specific stuff. So what do you want to compare yourself to? I've just put in here, for example, median salaries. Nice, middle of the road, average, match the market kind of approach. Where? Well, we recruit most of our people right here in the GTA, so it's from the local marketplace. How are we going to do that? Okay, we might use industry surveys, we might use labor statistics, we might use a number of other things. We'll get to that in a sec. One thing I'll caution you to, in anything you do around compensation, and not everybody agrees with me, but always put in some kind of protection that communicates to people that should the business situation arise, you reserve the right to blow everything up and change it. Because technology changes so quickly, and the environment, the market is changing all the time, you have to protect yourselves, and this is something we see our clients not doing. They make these promises, whether it's a bonus plan or anything else, and they don't protect their right to say, you know what, we might need to change this. Now, you shouldn't use that to mean that you can go changing things all the time, because that kills trust. But especially with incentive plans, you get into something, you say, oh, if you do this, I'm going to pay you that. But then the business doesn't make its milestones, the business can no longer afford it, but you're stuck because you made a contract with people. But if your contract says, we reserve the right to, it gives you a bit more flexibility. It tells the employee, you know, we do still have to consider what the business can afford. So just as a caution. So once you've created your philosophy, the next step now is to check out the competition. And what you want to do is assess your competitiveness. So how are you doing it today? Those of you that have staff, when you are making a hire, how do you decide what to pay somebody? Any answers?
Based on the knowledge of the market.
Okay, and how are you getting that knowledge? Are you through your networks? And yeah, okay. Are some of the people you call, are they often hiring similar types of skills?
Yeah, most likely in a tech world, it's a usual situation when there's certain network of people, you know, your own network, and you ask how much you pay for this exact type of resource.
Are any of these people that you might consider hiring people from? Anywhere? Are any of these people that you talk to in your network, are they people that you might at some point be competing with skills for the same people? As you grow, you may find that becomes a bit of a challenge because there will become competitive hesitation. So right now it's working, but you may find that as you grow on. So any other thoughts on how to get market data?
Definitely industry study, but also when I've interviewed, I've asked what their expectations are, and you can get to know where in their career they are. So based on that, you know, a lot of times when you just interview enough people, you just kind of know what the, you know, you might not know exactly on the mark what they want to be paid, but you know kind of ballpark.
Right, because you see a trend in what your candidates are asking for. Okay. And how much time does the average interview take you?
I budget an hour.
Okay. How many interviews do you usually have to do before you find the right candidate? Just curious.
Such a hit and miss this year. I had 5 to do 1 hire.
So, and again, I'm not sure if you made Margot's session last week, but I think she had some thoughts on how to target that a little bit better and that kind of thing. So, but bottom line is it's time-consuming work, which takes time away from running your business, right? So, as you're assessing competitive, but you do need to take the time to do it. So you need to follow your philosophy. So once you've created it, louder? Okay, I'm sorry. So once you have created your philosophy, you need to make sure you're following it. Duh, right? You want to benchmark the relevant markets. So you want to get out there and get as much information as you can. And you want to make sure, this is always a little tricky in a smaller organization, but try to differentiate your jobs from your people. The first thing the business needs to do is decide what work needs to get done and how you're going to segment that work. Then you need to find out what the value of that work is in the marketplace, okay, as you guys are doing right now by calling your networks and that sort of thing. So keep that in mind, because it's very easy to just want to pay the person based on what they want, but making sure there's a fit there is important. So the competitive context, you've got your philosophy, you know where you want to position yourself, you know what your business reputation is, what your financial situation is, what's your affordability, what kinds of other things do you offer. So that's your benefits, your perks, your flexible work, all that kind of stuff. Could be your job location, anything. And then you need to define your jobs, as I said. So you need to figure out who's going to be doing what kind of work needs to get done. So right now, we've heard the network, basically, and asking candidates for their input. Any other thoughts on that? Industry studies, you had that too. Okay, so those are good. So here's some of the ones that we've come up with. Key here is reputable relevant surveys. You want to be careful of free internet data. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. I actually completed a survey last week just to test that. Somebody forwarded it to me through 3 people. It was supposed to be for the graphic design industry, business owners in the graphic design industry. Well, the way the questionnaire was structured, I completed the form without lying once based on my business, because it wasn't structured properly. And my data went into that pot. So if anybody's looking at free graphic design data out there soon, be careful, because there's HR consulting information in there and nobody called to question it. Okay? So just be careful about where your data is coming from. All right? If it's an association thing, or where you know who the participants are and you know that it's relevant to your skills market, that's great. But just be careful. Industry articles, websites, there's lots of stuff. Mars has terrific information, I'm sure. They've got access to market intelligence. For many of you probably qualify for that. So use everything that you can find that's objective, published information, as well as your networks, your social media, your recruitment experiences, turnover. When people leave your company, many of you might not be there yet, but when people leave, that is an ideal opportunity to try to understand why. Now, often they'll lie. Often they'll say, oh, they gave me an offer I couldn't refuse, or it's a great career opportunity. And in many cases that's true, but most of the time people will leave because they don't like their manager. So try to dig a little deeper, try to really understand what it is that are making people leave, and are your salaries competitive or not, right? When they're leaving for that opportunity, is it really the same job for 10K more? Or is it really a career opportunity, right? And your whiners. The more, as Lynn said earlier, the more people that are in your office expressing concern, that will tell you, gee, maybe I need to investigate that. As you have more and more people, you may find that a certain select group of skills are constantly in your office saying, I have a friend who, and did you know this place down the street is doing this? And so that says, okay, little spidey sense goes up. I need to go find out more about this. I need to dig. I need to, you know, all that market intelligence that everybody does on a product basis, you know, think about it for your people too. It's the same approach, okay? You need to be like a little investigative reporter. So think about that. You're always gonna have the odd employee. It's the same guy every Wednesday morning, has something new to complain about. Chances are there's a different problem there, right? But these are all of these things are valuable inputs to your decision making. There's no right answer, there's no magic book. We publish a survey and we actually have a couple of our clients that call it their Bible. And their management team will say, well, what's the number for this? You know, intermediate software designer. It's like, it's not a magic book. There's a whole range of data in there. You got to think it through. It's a decision-making tool. It's not a magic book, okay? When you're looking at surveys, I said before, be careful, find out where the data is coming from. Make sure that the benchmark jobs in that survey map to the jobs you actually need in your business. Okay, make sure that the data is collected properly. So by that, you're looking at, are they just saying, oh, are you a software designer? How much money do you make? Put it in the survey. Or are they saying, okay, this is essentially what this kind of software designer does. These are the different levels of skill and the career path. Where does your person fit and what do they make? Where's the information coming from? If the employees are just putting it in themselves, like the odd individual, again, be careful. PEO used to do a survey. I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but they used to do the same survey. One went to employers, one went to association members directly. The members one was always 5% higher than the one that was completed by the employers. Now, some of the reasons for that were people included their pension match, they included their overtime, they included all kinds of things, whereas the employers are doing it based on a solid methodology. So again, look at where it's coming from and how it's done. Look at the calculation methodologies. I've worked with surveys that were awful. Their statistical approach was completely wrong. The math was wrong. If the math is wrong, what's the point, right? The relevance. So we talked about who's on the participant list. Are they companies you might need to get skills from someday? Companies you might lose your people to. Those are the companies you care about. So make sure that you know if that data is relevant. And it might be local, it might be national, it might be provincial. It depends on your circumstances. And the other thing is obviously affordability. Surveys will range anywhere from absolutely free to tens of thousands of dollars. So you want to pick the one that's right for you and it's going to give you the most return. Now this stuff gets a little boring. So try not to fall asleep. But what you want to do as to assess your competitiveness is now you know what work needs to be done, right? So you want to now map that knowledge into the market data that you can collect from all those different sources. And you want to make sure that you're looking at the data that fits with your philosophy. You're going to have to do some research, trends, variances, why is this different than that? Why is, something's a little wonky here and there? That's going to happen. So you need to go and figure out why. Why is this job family paid so much more than that one? And then you need to build a very simple structure. And don't get us wrong, we're not trying to suggest that you build this huge monstrous structure when you're really, really small. But you need to be thinking this way, and you need to sort of create some ranges that fit with what you have today. So that when you hire a second, a third, a 400th engineer, that you know where they fit within your own hierarchy, and you can just, it makes growth so much easier. Once you've figured out what you think your salary ranges need to look like, then the next step is to look at your current employees against those decisions. And how are you doing right now? Are you paying where you think you need to be paying? Are you paying too low? Are you paying too high? Figure all that out and then identify where your exposures are. You may have your two most critical people, but they came to you 6 years ago and you've never looked at their salary since, and their skills have become quite scarce in the marketplace, they might be at serious risk. So from a business perspective, can you afford to lose those people or not? So these are the business decisions you have to make, okay? So I guess I just kind of covered this slide. But you want to position people in those ranges. The ideal situation is that their position within that range is based on their contribution to the organization. So you say, okay, you know what? This finance or this accountant is worth a certain amount of money to me, right? That's what it's worth in the marketplace. This particular accountant is actually might be worth 10% more because they know this, this, and this, and they can take on that, and they're very flexible, and they have all this experience. So you have to position people in the range based on their individual contribution, but at the same time, you're saying the job is only worth so much. It's like bringing in a mid-level accountant and paying them 200 grand. Would you do that? No. The job is only worth a certain amount to the business. Okay. So I guess just sort of to tie things up a bit, it's really important to look at things on a regular basis, especially in a technology market. It is moving all the time. So if you hire someone and then you don't review their salary, you don't stop to say, hey, where are they sit today, you could have some serious exposures. Not to mention an unhappy employee because they don't feel you really care that they did a good job because you haven't done anything about their salary in 5 years. You want to look at it at least annually, or else you do fall at risk of falling behind, okay? And whenever you move people around, this might not be relevant for this group now, but as you grow and you have someone moving from this group to that group, you need to look at their salary when you transfer them or you promote them to make sure that they are being recognized for the added contributions, okay? So again, always balance internal equity, because the two people doing the same job in your company will talk to each other about what they get paid. I had a client once who said, oh, my people don't talk about pay. I told them I'd fire them if they talked about that. It's off limits. So, well, they're going to go home, they're going to have a beer, they're going to talk, and you can't fire them for that. Newsflash. So, I think it's better to recognize that up front. And yes?
You put one of the bullets here at least annually.
Yeah.
Don't you think that for technological startups in particular, it would be a kind of higher frequency?
It could be. It could be. This really is intended to be a minimum, because if you're in a high growth startup, the requirements of people's jobs are going to change dramatically.
Could it be do you see that it could be some maximum, like could it be a situation when we need to review every, say, 3 months?
I have seen circumstances like that. Not in the recent past, though. I don't know if you would agree. I mean, back in the late 90s, it was definitely very common that you had to review things every 3 months because it was moving so quickly. Now, I would say, if you're in a position to look at it, and it doesn't mean, when I say review, it doesn't mean you have to give people raises every year. It means you need to take a step back and say, where do we stand? How are these people paid? Are they still competitive or not? Have they improved their contribution? Are they giving more to the company? Do they deserve a raise? It's more just looking at it. That's what I'm talking about. So,
if you as a manager do your reviews more frequent than it's normal should be, wouldn't you look in the eyes of your employees as you kind of scary to lose them, and hence be a subject for record from their side?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
So, for example, you decided instead of doing it annually, we will do a quarterly review.
Okay.
And wouldn't it signal to your employees that you kind of scary to lose them, and they will be, bullying you in terms of raises?
So the question was, if you were to do reviews quarterly, then the employee would have the perception that you are very scared to lose them, which might cause them to look outside when they might not have been doing it otherwise. And that is true. Usually to do something every 3 months, and that's if you're sitting down with the employee, okay? And I'm not talking about performance reviews, because honestly, performance discussions should happen every day. They should happen when they need to happen. But a salary review is something you can do behind the scenes. So it's not something I would commit to doing every 3 months in your philosophy or your strategy. But if you have a set of skills that you know is hot and you know you need to protect, then behind the scenes, I would be making those calls to my friends. I would be reading everything I could about it. I would be trying to get objective data that would make me feel confident that my salaries are still okay. And I might do that every 3 months, but I think right now, for most skills, that would be more work than required. I don't think it's really necessary, unless there's something really cool about your particular group. But in the current environment, we're finding most of our clients are doing it annually, and that is working for them.
Yes, I would agree. Back in the late 90s, I was involved in a project to keep an eye, a very close eye actually, every 3 months on ASIC skills. At the time, it was, ASIC was very scarce, and we found that we did have a data source. There was a specialist that was conducting market research on specifically ASIC skills. And so we had privy to see it every 3 months. There was a quarterly report being distributed. And what we did is we worked with the management team. Of course, you're talking a large organization. So this was pretty much mandated by the senior management of the research and development team that we do this. And we did not give increases each quarter, but what we did was we went back and communicated what our findings were. When there was an increase, and again, we're getting off on a bit of a tangent, but I think it's important that these are exceptions, and when you are planning on giving increases, quite often what you'll find is they're considered premiums. They're not always added to base salary because of the blips that sometimes you see with technology. It's more of a conservative approach. Not to say that I haven't heard of the base additive type increases, it definitely happens, but sometimes it's better to be conservative. So actually on the paycheck it shows as a premium, so that if there is a blip in the market that you can deal with it. I'm talking big company at this point, obviously in a smaller organization. Again, more informal, absolutely, you're probably going to, if you have sources of information, that's kind of the challenge is right now I don't think that there are any sources I can think of that come out every 3 months. The only one actually is we provide a salary increase update complimentary to anyone who's on our network, the TechEdge network. We provide a salary increase update every 3 months. And this was something that our client base had requested. But that's a very high level view. That's kind of, what is your salary budget going to be?
It's not specific to any kind of skill set. And the thing is that these people, if they're hot enough that they warrant to be looked at every 3 months, most likely they know it. And so they already know that they could walk away. So, because, right? Again, it's a very open world out there, and 10 newspapers have already told them how important they are and how scarce they are, and the industry articles will be already telling them that. So they will, most likely, if you're at a point where you need to do this every 3 months, those employees will already know that you need to do it every 3 months. Right? Does that answer the question? Okay. Is there anything else at this point, or we're almost done, and then we can take questions. Okay. So really the key thinking for today is we're encouraging you all to think about building consistency into your growth. It doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be complicated, but it needs to be consistent. You need to have a philosophy to guide your decision making. As you grow and you hire managers to make those decisions, they need to know what your intent is. They need to know what parameters they have to make decisions. Okay, make sure you're benchmarking as objectively as you can. So again, try to supplement a lot of the subjective, intuitive things, networky type stuff. Try to complement that with as much objective information as you can. All right, try to create some sorts of ranges. Make sure you are assessing people's performance, because they need to know, A, what's expected of them, which goes back to what Margot talked about last week. And once they know what's expected, they need to know how they're doing against that. And then they want to get paid for it. We talked about the decision-making guidelines, reviewing it regularly. Some tricks that we've learned over the years that can kind of help to maintain consistency in an organization as it grows. Sometimes it's difficult when you have different departments, different managers making decisions about pay for similar skills. You can have roll-up reviews so that the most senior person still has to look at everything before they approve it. That's pretty standard. You can also do peer reviews. I don't know, has anybody been involved with peer review before? Basically, it's great. As an HR person, I can say it's great because it's very difficult for, let's say HR is the person who's kind of coordinating all of this. It's very difficult for us to really understand the technical nuances of why one person might be worth more money than another. But if you put all those software managers in a room together and make them defend their decisions or recommendations to each other, there's a whole different level of rigor that goes into that process. And so it's very important, and it's a very helpful tool.
And that actually, sorry to interject, but that actually goes, I have an expression, it's called the peanut butter approach to salary increases. And basically the peanut butter approach means that you decide on a budget, say it's 3%, and everybody gets it equally. Back to the peer review. The peer review is a really great way, and obviously can be done at a more informal level in smaller organizations, but it's a great way to ensure that you're differentiating based on performance and merit, and that you have a good business case that's been well discussed and justified for giving out increases across a group. So it's a great tool.
And again, coming back to the black box theory, you know, the biggest thing that you can do is communicate. So have a plan and communicate the plan and live by the plan. If you can do that, then you will have a lot less employees. I'm not saying you have no employees in your office. There will always be some. And the other issue is things pop up. You think you're stable, you've got everything nice, all your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, everybody's paid perfectly, and something happens. That creates a shift in the dynamics out there. And so always be vigilant, but communication is the key. People want to know if they feel you're doing that due diligence, if they feel you're out there looking out for them, making sure you're doing right by them, they will have a lot more trust, and that will produce a more committed workforce in general. Okay. So the improvements you'd want to see, again, they're not something that's going to happen overnight. You don't implement something like this and 2 months from now you're going to see huge improvements. But the improved performance will come if you hire the right people at the right price. So the key is the right people at the right price. You should start to see reduced absenteeism if you had that as a problem to begin with. Increased productivity, improved retention. And you should ultimately have more time to run your business and focus on the things that are really important. Okay. And something else to remember is that success really does depend on the overall employee engagement. So it goes back to what I said earlier. People leave because they don't like their manager. They don't believe in the company direction. They're not getting the opportunity to work on interesting work. They're not getting any training or opportunities, or they see no future for their career. Those things do matter to people. And they are sometimes challenges in small businesses because you don't have a huge hierarchy. You don't have 100, 200, 2,000 different types of positions that people can move into. So sometimes you have to plan for that too. But you want to get the most out of your people for as long as you can.
One of the common mistakes we find with compensation is, as Helen described, quite often you'll find that people are unhappy, but it's got to do with not really, doing the kind of technology that they'd like to do, not having a good leader to work with, or for not getting the development that they need. What happens is compensation, when it is available, it's an easy fix. And so what you tend to find is where there is a budget available is that we use the expression, throw compensation at it. What will happen is you end up paying more, but you're not really getting the results and the behaviors that you want. What you're getting is a quick fix, which becomes a short-term solution because the real problem hasn't gone away. And so that's one thing that I caution is using compensation too freely.
Mm-hmm. The key is that people need to feel valued, and they need to be getting something out of the relationship too. Okay. So the key takeaways, really, compensation is a moving target. Take the time to know where you stand, because again, just going back to the gentleman in green, you're getting a lot of information from your candidates, but remember that they're on the other side of the negotiating table than you are. So you're sort of benchmarking based on people who have a different different motivation or different agenda than you do. So you want to kind of arm yourself as much as you can with supplemental information so that when you're at that table, you can listen to them and you can say, even if in your own mind, you're still collecting that data, but you can say, this guy's out to lunch, this guy's crazy. Why is this guy so cheap, right? Because you already know what your benchmark is. So that's just another caution there.
And this is very important when you're talking about hiring sales too. So.
Yeah.
Because they're really good.
Yeah, they're really good at selling themselves, and they're really good at getting lots of money for themselves. That's what you're hiring them for, right? Take the time to do it right the first time. So I know what we're talking about is a lot. It can be perceived to be a ton of work, and when you've only got 5 people or 20 people, it's like, oh, why bother? But if you really do plan to grow, be prepared. I have a client right now. They've been clients of ours for about 8 years. They came to us because they had 40% turnover. They had 35 people and 40% turnover. They grew to 160, and then they grew to 200 and something in the space of the 8 years. Now, they're a call center environment, so they actually still have 15% turnover. But what they've done is they've taken the time to figure out where they want to be. They've put some very basic structure into place. They benchmark their market regularly. They have implemented performance management, some basic job descriptions, not the 10-page jobbies, but basic ones. And they've managed to reduce that from 40% to 15%. And they truly believe that it has to do with the structure that they've put into place. So again, high growth, lots of complexity, things are changing all the time. They've also won lots of awards, as you know, Small Business of the Year, Fast 500, all those kinds of things in the last 2 years. So they've really turned their whole business around, and they truly believe that this was a fundamental part of it. So if you can avoid the mess that they got into up front, just by thinking differently and thinking about your employees as an investment, then that will set you in good stead to move forward. I think that's all we have to say. So anybody have questions or comments?
If you have any questions,
think we're full of crap? Go ahead, say so.
that was great. Thank you both. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If we could just ask Helen and Lynn to repeat the questions, because this is being filmed and we want people to hear what the questions are being asked.
We know that this can be a little bit of a sensitive topic too, so a lot of times people don't want to share, so we will stick around after. Yes?
Yeah. Earlier I think you had a point about equity, and I think it was about considering the use of equity as part of the compensation package. And I think for a startup, due to insufficient funds, I think sometimes the motivation might be that to use equity is to offer to a candidate. What are your views on that?
The question is, what is our view on using equity as part of your compensation mix or compensation package, especially at the startup phase? Okay. I am an advocate of a program such as that. In the, I guess it was very late 80s, early 90s, they can be an incredible part of a package. What we have found, though, is, I would say, over the last 10 years, that the idea of leverage or equity has lost some of its shine. Not to say that it shouldn't still be considered. I think it's very important, especially in our opinion at the executive level. Obviously, founders, it's inherent, or what we call critical key staff. People that they may not necessarily be part of your executive team, but you consider them to be very critical and influential in your company's future. I would say that this has become more of a strategic, targeted tool, as opposed to what we used to see in the past, which was a universal approach. When you would look at using equity, in my experience years ago, it was a universal approach and very powerful. I think that as technology, the cycle, goes. We know what technology's like, and we know how, the downturns and the upturns. I think we may again see a day where it could become universal, but that is not existing in terms of the information we're collecting from the market right now.
It seems to have returned. Oh, sorry, just 1 second. It seems to have returned back to it. It's a very. It's great to create a sense of ownership. and it's a great long-term tool to build commitment to the organization, but it doesn't have the same charm, I'll call it, as it did in the late 90s, where everybody would flip all the time because, oh, I've got 10,000 options over here, but you're going to give me 15. Meanwhile, all of these options are really not worth much right now, but they all had visions, right, of how many cars they were going to buy and how big a house they were going to get if they stayed 2 years and went IPO. That has gone away. So it's no longer that kind of options, but it is still a very good way to build ownership in your business. The other challenge that happened a lot in the late 90s, we're that old, so we can talk about back then, but we can all learn from these problems, right? We learn from our history. And is that companies were throwing so many options at everybody, the universal plans, and 2 years in, they were out of options. And so then they had to start diluting their pool, which was not going over well with the investors, and it becomes a nightmare. So it's something you should manage carefully and think about who will really provide the most value if they have ownership in the company. So probably no options for the receptionist. Okay, right? Yes?
How would you, like in today's environment, what's a typical conditioning of this giveaway of equity? In what form they give it away? It's vested options, something else?
The question was, in what form do we typically see the equity being given to a typical employee in today's market? That's a very good question, and things seem to be kind of evolving and kind of fluid right now. We definitely are still seeing a strong presence of stock options, with typical vesting of anywhere between 3, 4, sometimes even 5 years. You're looking at payouts over, say, that 4-year period of 25%. So there's a lot of different kind of design elements, but you're also starting to see some other areas like phantom stock. You're looking at actual stock as opposed to stock options. You're seeing it also in the form of RSP, contributory RSP programs, where companies are matching in their own company stock or stock options. So we're starting to see that too. But again, because the prevalence has decreased, and we've been tracking this over 10 years, so we've seen, especially on the universal plan side, in general, the whole equity side of things has gone down. So even though there are some new creative approaches, we're not seeing them in big numbers yet.
When you're saying phantom stocks, what that should mean?
Phantom stocks, it's like you're mirroring the value. There isn't a true stock, but you're mirroring the value against a book value or if you're on the stock market.
But it's still kind of vested, right?
Yes, it's still tracked and paid out at whatever value. So for example, if you looked at a stock option and you were given it at a certain exercise price, and then the stock went up in value, you would still be paid out if you were able to, if it was vested and you were able to exercise. It would be the same sort of thing.
But it's not actually real stock, it's actually a liability the company's carrying to pay this bonus out over time. It's just based on the stock price. So it's a lot of these more complicated programs are not often that cost effective or even recommended for smaller organizations. Yes?
What can you say about profit sharing, like as a tool to retain employees?
It can. The key, I think, is you have to really think about, again, how you want to treat your people. So some organizations will say, you know what, everybody, if we have 12 employees, we take this much of the profit. If we make this number, we're going to have this much profit. This much of it is going to go to the profit sharing program. 12 employees, we divide it 12 ways, everybody gets the same. That is great for teamwork. It's not going to be a retention tool for some of your key staff. So I've worked in an organization that had that, and I mean, most of the time, because it was watered down so much, everybody got enough money for a case of beer May long weekend. So we always got paid right before May long weekend, and we all had money for our 2-4. And that was kind of, it was a manufacturing facility, but we also had engineering, development, marketing people. So it was a great rah, we're all part of the same team thing, but it didn't, I mean, senior marketing person, they get, $50 or $100. It's like, yeah, whatever, okay.
Or if we design it with that criteria in mind, that the key people get more and
Absolutely. And if you want it to be more of a retention tool and a recognition, then that would be the way I would recommend you do it. But if you want to just create that team environment, then you can do everybody gets the same. So it really is about what you want to achieve with it. Often with profit sharing programs though, again, as you grow, what happens is the pool dwindles. And so you want to make sure that what you start today, you'll still be able to get the same effect with your senior marketing person, because your pool will have to go up substantially as your people grows and all that kind of stuff, right? Your operating expenses will go up as you grow. So you have to think about, when you put these plans into place, taking them away 3 years later can be a bit of a problem, or 5 years later. So really think long term and think about how it will affect people, because it is all about psychology, as Joe said earlier. Really all we want to do with our compensation elements is help to keep things like base salary is really, it's a stability thing. It needs to be there. People have bills to pay. When you start to get into your incentives, you want to drive certain behaviors, you want to drive business results. So you want to make sure that the plan you put into place does that, because incentive plans of any kind, profit sharing or otherwise, and sales is a real big one, they can actually be counterproductive. I worked on this plan very early in my career. Project team doing this special customized product. They were, the team was basically going to get, I think it was 50% of their salary if they made this deadline, because it was going to cost this much extra and the customer was going to fund this because they wanted it that badly. So these people, they worked day, night, one of them got a divorce over it. It was a complete mess. They missed the first deadline. So the number went down to 30% if they make the second deadline. Okay, so they kept working day, night, it was still enough. They missed that deadline. At the end of the day, then they got really demoralized and they missed the last basic original deadline. So they actually got nothing. And that whole team was completely demoralized. As I said, one of them lost their marriage out of it. It was a mess. So really, again, think about what you're trying to achieve and think about the behaviors it's going to create and think about how it's going to affect that team. Because you don't want to lose people over it. Sometimes it can be counterproductive. If you've got a high level of scientific type, engineering type people, often the bonus is a nice to have, it's a recognition. It's like, wow, I got this, I did really well and I got this bonus and that's great. I really appreciate that. But it won't drive them to work harder. They're already driven by the work they're doing. So you might be wasting your money. You might not need to do it. So that's where incentive plans get tricky, and that's why we really wanted to start on base salary today, because each situation is very unique when you start getting into incentives. But be careful. Big flashing yellow lights. They're good things, but they can backfire. Anything else? Okay.
For a smaller group that's not quite at the stage of hiring, but is there any tips you can give us? I mean, this is really good information, that what we need to tell philosophy before we start bringing in people.
Yes.
But within ourselves, I think our biggest thing is that we're stretched and we're not paying ourselves.
Right.
But any tips?
Absolutely. Well, the question was for a very small organization who's not at the point of hiring a team yet. So you're a group of founders working on a product or service, and with some tips just to help you keep the motivation going and keep the whole process evolving forward. Part of it is that at your stage of the game, take advantage of as many of these opportunities as you can. Anything that's free, anything that you can build a network. We recognize that obviously it's hard when you're not paying yourself, so paying out for services is obviously an issue. For example, I mentioned earlier about the handouts that we're providing. Give us your business card and we'll email it to you. It's quite a package of stuff. That is complimentary for anyone here at the Mars course, and what it does is it outlines how to do your philosophy. It goes through in more detail to give you a kind of a starting point and a vision, and it also has some tips and tools and templates, like everything from how do you structure a job,
examples of how you might move forward. Have you started to think about when you'll be in a position to hire staff and who those first staff will be? Have you gotten to that point? Okay.
We're hoping in the next few months.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Is part of what we presented was defining what work needs to be done. And you can't do everything. Obviously, you're looking towards growth and developing a team. So figure that out before you even start to consider recruiting, and document it so that it's basically something that's true to the organization, true to your vision, and then won't bias you. Because what happens in the recruiting side of things, as I'm sure Margot talked about, is you like someone and you want that to be the person. You have that structure, you have something. That document, I would say, is the single most important document for a starting organization, because it will become the foundation for all of your people decisions. It won't just be what you use to do a small job posting. It will be also what helps you to assess in the interview that this is the right candidate. It will also help you when you're trying to figure out the value of the salary at offer. You can benchmark that. You can get some information, and so on for planning.
Because again, if you take the approach that you're going to ask the candidates what they want when they come in, and you're going to get that information, and that's a good set of information. But if there's a way that you can do it when you're doing your manpower plan, so you say, okay, we're going to hire these 4 people. What order do we think we need to get them in? How much is each one of them going to cost? And what we find is with a lot of people in your situation, really don't know yet. It's really just I don't know, let's see what they want. It's very hard for you to plan a budget when you really have no idea what somebody's worth. And the difference between $100,000 and $200,000 is a lot of money at your stage of the game, right? So it's important to try to arm yourselves up front and know what you're getting into before you start that recruiting process, if you can.
Mm-hmm. And it'll follow the life cycle of the employee, performance management, career development, everything. It'll follow them right through. So you build on it, and there'd be different parts, and that's the sort of thing we provide more and more information on. But like Helen and I work with some commercialization type organizations. They're still very much at the stage that you're at, and so there are services out there. I would definitely, leave us your business card, and we can see what we can help you to do to refer you to. Okay.
Carrie, do you guys offer that sort of help up front, that sort of coaching up front to organizations?
Talent management strategy, post jobs on the Mars portal. I don't know, Joy, the Mars portal. Oh, it's still really big. Yeah, we're building it out.
Okay,
we have
great.
plans, but post jobs through Mars, or ask the Mars advisor to circulate your job and post it that they might.
Okay, great. So yeah, but definitely we should connect, and there might be some other things we can think of for you as well.
Yeah, part of what we'd like to do, and we realize that obviously it's not revenue producing for us, and that's not why we're here. We really want to see the technologies, it may sound very philanthropic, but we want to see the technology world in Canada thrive. And there have been some ups and downturns over the years, and part of why we work with the commercialization group, for example, in Ottawa, is because we can help them in a very small way, but it sets you up for the growth, and it helps to kind of, help you, point you in the right direction so that you're putting your efforts in the right place.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.